Welcome everyone. The World Microfinance Forum Geneva is a not-for-profit based here in Switzerland. Our mission is to promote inclusive financial markets, which basically means microfinance and other related topics to microfinance. One of those topics that we have as our first objectives is to look at corporate governance within microfinance institutions and institutions that have interests in investing in microfinance.
Microfinance and governance. Who would have thought a little bit more than 2 years ago that we would compare the performance of microfinance to conventional finance, that we would think about this issue of delinking the performance of microfinance from what conventional banks do? Who would have thought about that? We couldn't have because of the financial crisis, and largely that was a global financial crisis that could not have been anticipated. But one would go perhaps a little bit far in saying that the crisis really prompted the conversation about governance. There are governance issues whenever a microfinance institution transforms.
Corporate governance has evolved in what we believe a very positive way. Now, we've always thought that there are two ways to have good governance. One is because you believe in it, or two is because you're required to have it. I think the Compartamos history would like to think of ourselves as an institution that believes in good governance from the start. When we were an NGO, we started implementing a set of rules and a set of procedures based on the OECD's good governance principles that we thought made the institution stronger. A lot of people, wait to implement good governance until they're required to because they're regulated. And again, most of the industry is still unregulated, so that's not the case. Or when either investor, donors, or people actually enforce these principles on them. But I think one of the things that as an industry we should be a lot more proactive and preempt is try to do this out of principle, not just obligations.
It sounds very impressive. There's no problem whatsoever in Cartamos as it went through the two stages of its transformation. Sajeev, you come from a completely differently positioned microfinance institution that is known also outside of India for its innovativeness and broad range of services. I know that you have a very complex structure. How do these general principles of governance translate in your day-to-day operations?
When it comes to India, which has more than 1 billion people, about 14 written independent languages, about 300 spoken dialects, 27 states, most of who would qualify to be European countries in size, over 200 political parties, ranging from communism on one side to right-wing extremism on the other side. I don't think corporate governance can be a single word. It has so many hues and colors, so many noises, and that we've witnessed also not just in India. If you look across the world, what was right yesterday has suddenly become wrong today. What is right today will become wrong tomorrow. So can we keep a static set of principles that say this is how corporate governance should be? These are the parameters, these are the rules, that chairman and CEO should be separate or chairman and CEO should be together. The board should have these rights, the chairman should have these rights, the CEO should have these rights, the management should have this kind of responsibilities. I don't think so. And I really think that from an evolution perspective, India is a perfect example to showcase exactly this dimension, the word I started with.
Well, I can maybe say a few words on this. On one hand, talking about microfinance. On the other hand, also personally, I mean, I've also started a company, and I'm growing it, and we've got a board. And I also see what would it actually feel if I didn't have the board, or if I could run the whole show on my own. And of course, I must say it would be much more fun. And there would be sort of a tendency to do that. If I owned the whole company, I think there would be that trend. And but I think it would feel good, but it would probably long term not be good for the company, and then ultimately for me personally. And this is, I think, what we of course often see is that people, maybe it's a group of 3, maybe it's one single person, start something. And I think normally, if something starts small, there is no need for real governance, because I think, as it has also been said here, you have to govern things when they get complicated and complex. But when it's small, well, maybe not. And a lot of things in microfinance, they really started small, and they are still small. And therefore, if you look across our portfolio, which is 200 or 300 microfinance institutions, there's of course a lot of difference to be seen. And the 2 examples here, I mean, they are the shining stars. And one would expect that if you're so big, so complex, so old, that you really have gone through quite some development. But I must say, I think it would be wrong to expect from every institution at every stage to adhere to all those corporate governance issues. And even, I think there's, and you said it just before a little bit, it's not something you can do so quickly. I think it's like democracy, which is probably corporate governance for a country. We all know what happens if some people come and want to teach people now from one day to the other it should be democracy. That's a process which takes a long time. And I think that's the same case in microfinance. When we analyze corporate governance structure in our investments, yes, that's important, but it's only one aspect of a lot of indicators, and one which at the moment for us is more important than corporate governance is ownership structure, because ultimately the power lies with the owners. And just when there is a situation of a crisis with what we have seen, then we all would like to see that the power is at the right place, in the right hands, and for instance not dispersed. So at the beginning, when you're small and all the power is in one hand, if you're big, then the power is in many hands. I think there can be a lot of damage if you don't do it in the right way. And this is something which is not always the case.
Thanks, Klaus. I'm sure we're going to come back to this issue of ownership structure, which you pushed out of the whole governance debate. I would see it, in fact, as central to governance, i.e. how is a board composed, particularly after having involved in a microfinance institution from an NGO.
I agree fully with Klaus. Governance is one precondition, one factor for success, but it's not a sufficient one. It can fail. It can be weakened in no time. So it is one factor for success. We believe in it because independent, if you talk about microfinance or bigger banks or business as such, textile business, whatever, good business has sound governance. If good business really goes over the longer time in a sustainable way of growth, of competitiveness, and of good reputation, good governance plays a positive role. Why? Good governance signifies 3 basic criteria for organizational quality, in our view. One is transparency. The second criteria is about efficiency. Efficiency signifies you can avoid as far as possible conflicts because you have good roles. And the third criteria is it's basically about accountability. Who has what kind of responsibility, and does the person live up to it or not? Good governance can contribute well done to competitiveness of a business and also to its reputation. And as we know well, reputation has a market value. How do we handle the relationship between the owners, the shareholders, and the managers? it's about who has what kind of responsibility, accountability in this relationship. If you don't get to clear structures and processes also in India, the shareholders may get very angry. If the shareholders are overwhelmingly dominating the business, the management may get angry. If you have just a one leader forever, there are very few cases I know that this is really a sustainable solution over the long time.
That allows me now really to ask Guy, as the representative of a large microfinance lending window in BNP Paribas. You're not doing equity, so you're not really, let's say, directly in the day-to-day business exposed to governance issues, but you're lender. So, I mean, in your refinancing decisions, does the governance structure of a microfinance institution matter for you or not?
Yes, it's for our bank a key issue also. For us, efficiency means what have been already said by my colleagues, clear and evident view of the business by the shareholders and a board meeting, independent board meeting. And this has to be supported by a very well and clear organized process. We expect in a certain way that in fact the organization and the risk management of the company is for us a key issue. Now, when we want to enter in relationship with MFIs, we are present in many countries, emerging countries, India, Indonesia, Africa, and also Latin America. We start to develop the activity in Latin America. We are not willing to grow in terms of outstanding. We want to select people and MFIs, even very small, but which have a big commitment in social impact. We are not driven by revenue, we are not driven by profitability. We try to see in the goal that want to reach this MFI if the ethical dimension and also the social dimension is present even in very small and disorganized MFIs, is the way we are running the business.
On corporate governance, therefore, let me give you a simple example. If you go down the route of micro detail in terms of application forms from customers who ask for loans from microfinance institutions, what you'll normally find is that the reason for loan, especially in the rural and semi-urban area, is that they want to buy a cow. And it's a supplementary income to their core economic activity. When we looked at the cow example, what we found out was that the average loan size is about 8 to 10,000 rupees, and we'll convert that later. But there is no cow in India which is available for less than 20,000 rupees. So either the people were buying half a cow, or they were buying a goat and calling it a cow, or they were putting their own money in, or they were taking money from money lenders. So when you boil that up and look at it and say, okay, there are people who need alternative source of income, but they are either not telling you what they're using the money for, or the money you give is not sufficient. That is the core root of what leads up to a large corporate governance issue at a wider sense, when you don't know what your borrowers are borrowing money for. That's when we decided to put this dairy services in context. So when we give a loan for a customer to buy a cow, we also give advisory services for which there is a fee. And that goes from selection of the cattle right down to milk production and getting them market linked. So
is that cost covering, that fee?
It is more than cost covering. It actually produces a small margin, and it mitigates the risk that we assume on that work stream. And the uptake has been phenomenal. Of our 1 million technical assistance customers, 600,000 are cattle rearing customers. So that's the scale at which we're operating.